We've got two speakers tonight, are with us at ABODE often. They're wonderful volunteers. I met them at Death Cafe. If you haven't joined Death Cafe, it's a wonderful interactive activity that we do the second Saturday of every month. And we gather and we eat cake and we drink coffee and tea and we talk about death. And there's no agenda. We just talk. So anyway, that's where I met Wayne and Sandy, and we figured out that there are people, and we're their people, and they've been with us ever since. And so Wayne and Sandy joined us for our first doula cohort, and they are now doulas, and they have started their own business called Life Transition Doulas. And tonight they're going to share with us everybody dies. Yes, even us. So here's what you need to know. So Wayne, would you wave? And Sandy, would you give us a wave? And those are going to be our speakers tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and let you guys get this thing started.
Great.
And I'm going to mute.
And you're going to share the, yeah, perfect. So while Bev is getting the slides up, as she mentioned, Wayne and I are ABODE end-of-life doulas. We have loved every minute that we've spent at ABODE, with, both as volunteers and as doulas as well. So here we go. Perfect. And I think that we can just get a full screen maybe on that, and that might help us out. So a lot of the work all of the work that we do is focused specifically on those folks who are heading towards end of life. Actually, Bev, if you could do me a great favor and go to the very first screen, and then we'll go to the next screen, which would be the second screen. Just scroll on up and perfect. Yeah, there we go. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. So all the work that we do, of course, is for those folks who are walking the end of life path. Some folks we're only with for a few days, and some folks we're with for months. And almost all of those folks do become our friend in some way or another. Death itself, there are so many things that happen around death. There are a lot of processes that start to interact. And interestingly enough, this is the first time that Wayne and I have talked about the actual process piece for end of life. And so I was really excited whenever we actually got the opportunity to do this. Bev, if we could go to the next slide. I think maybe just using the scroll button. There you go. Perfect. So the fun fact about death, the truth about death is 100 out of 100 people in the entire world will at some point in their life die. There's a 100% probability that that will happen. Next slide, please. And it's inevitable. There's no way around it. As hard as we may try, it is definitely something that we cannot in any way prevent. And our next slide. So the bottom line, if you're born, you're going to die. Very, very plainly put, hopefully not too harshly, but that's just the way it is. So what we want to do today is to identify those key things, those key activities that happen around death, and then make some sense out of it, and then use this time to touch on most of them. Of course, we won't, because of time, we won't be able to do deep dives into any one thing, but we will be able to outline for you those things that we want to ensure that you have some sort of awareness of by the end of this talk. Next slide, Beth. You know, and whenever you're going through a death with somebody who's very close to you, it's so scary. Um, there's so many, you're starting to grieve, you're angry, you're upset, you have no idea how to approach this. You know, the last thing that you want to do is to figure out, you know, like, what do I do? What are the logistics? And for the most part, and I'm going to say, except for those folks in hospice, the hospice nurse and the hospice social worker, nobody's going to take you by the hand and say, here's what we have, you know, and, you know, you have some awareness of everything. But we want to just kind of touch on each one of those so that we have a little bit of information on each one. Next slide, please. Okay. So knowledge really is power. Um, and there's nothing fearful or upsetting about trying to understand, you know, the logistics. It's just looking at one thing at a time, understanding those things that need to happen, that could potentially happen, and then go from there. So that's what we're doing. That's what Wayne and I are doing today, hopefully for you guys. Next slide. So here's what we have. Who do I call whenever somebody dies? Pronouncing the time of death, what that is, and what that looks like, how that's defined. Body transport, so that ties in directly with disposition of the body and what's going to happen, and what that person has chosen to happen with their body. The death certificate being issued, memorial and celebrations of life, which have everything to do about a person's story, their life story, and how they affected others around them. Same thing with obituaries and eulogies. They're there to notify folks of the death and then to tell those, you know, beautiful memories about the person who has passed. And then taking those things and unraveling each piece of a lifetime one by one. Um, and that's probably the most challenging thing of all. I know one of the things that Aloha Arthur said, both in her book and in one of the podcasts that I'd listened to with her, which is that by far is one of the most challenging things that people come across, is once somebody passes, the person who's left to have to tease out all of those pieces and do the notifications and make the calls and sit with the bank and all that sort of thing. Very hard, but there is a way to approach that. And so we'll give you a high level look at that. And then how can we prepare? You know, what can we do as individuals to prepare for that as we either take care of somebody who's passing, or maybe we're just a part of that inner circle and we can be helpers in that. Next, Beth. Okay. So let's just start with a few simple questions. First thing is, who is the person under the care of? And so there could be a lot of different combinations of this, but Wayne and I just kind of break it down into four different pieces, which is hospice, which is the one that those of us at Abode are the most familiar with. If somebody is in the hospital whenever they pass, maybe they're in another care facility like a memory care or assisted living or something like that. Maybe they're not under any kind of a care in terms of being in a facility. Maybe they just pass at home. So those are the four areas that we take a look at. And so if that person is under hospice care, then who should be called? The person who should be called, top of the list, should be the hospice nurse. And especially with Abode, it makes it very easy for those of us who volunteer or perhaps kind of pitch it for the wonderful navigators there. Everything is outlined, all of the numbers for each one of those individuals at the hospice are documented in both the files and on our whiteboard. But that person you want to identify or that you want to call and notify is the hospice nurse. And so who can pronounce, and we'll go back through each one for each types of facilities, but who pronounces the time of death? In this case, it can be the hospice nurse, but in Texas, one of the following um, physicians, registered nurses, advanced practice registered nurses, or physician's assistants. Any of those individuals are by law able to pronounce the time of death. Now, the time of death. The time of death is the point at which the medical professional determines that vital signs such as the pulse and breathing and heart signs have ceased. And so it's the hospice nurses in this particular case, their responsibility to come and to verify that and to document that. And then who arranges for transport? That will be also the hospice nurse. And Beverly, you can chime in on this. I was wondering if the social worker also may play a part in this as well, as far as arranging for transport, or is that mostly the hospice nurse?
The hospice nurse. So the transport is usually to the mortuary or the funeral home. And
Right.
social worker makes those arrangements or helps us make those arrangements ahead of time.
Great.
It's not good form to show up at a death at 3 a.m. and no arrangements have been made and try and figure this out. But it happens, and I've been there. It's tough.
Yeah, very tough. Um, and it's, as Beverly said, it's either the funeral home who arranges for it, or even a mortuary transport service, which might be in the case of a cremation or in the case of donations, and we'll talk about each one of those a little bit later on, could be contacted for pickup. Now, if a person is in the hospital, um, the person who should be called, or persons, would be either the hospital RN who's on the floor and active on the floor, or the doctor will be notified by the staff who's taking care of the individual. Again, either the hospital RN or the doctor can actually pronounce the time of death. And who arranges for transport? It could be the hospital RN, but it also could be part of the hospital staff as well who are working underneath the RN. Other care facilities, again, the RN are on duty or the doctor. Um, and then the care facility staff will assist with that in the transport. Now, if they're not under any care facility, if the person who has passed Um, I called the actually Bear County's medical examiner's office because there were many, many, many things across many official sites, many government sites, where it would actually what's the word I'm looking for? It would actually they wouldn't agree with each other. So I thought, you know what, I'll just call the medical examiner's office. And lo and behold, Travis answers the phone. So Travis, we kind of went through a few scenarios, and he said you could call either the medical examiner's number directly, or they could just call 911. And so I said, well, I think for purposes of sharing this information with folks, let's just say 911, because more than likely you're not that person who may be there and trying to take care of the notifications. You're probably going to be upset. They're not really thinking straight. And so 911 is the easiest thing to do. And then the 911 operator will direct that person from there. And then the next of kin should be the one who contacts the funeral home or the mortuary transport. Next slide, Ms. Beverly. And so I know that you guys may have questions, and I thought what we could do is save the last 10 to 15 minutes at the very end for questions, instead of stopping for questions on each one of the slides, because we have so much to cover, around the logistics of death. So here's what happens to your body after you die. There are several body disposition options, and we're definitely not saying that these are the only ones available, but let's think of these as the primary ones. So if we look at, for example, traditional burial and green burial, and it's also Earth Day, which I really, really appreciate that for today, that we're going to talk about green burials and how that contrasts with traditional burials. But let's go back to traditional burials a little bit, traditional funeral homes. And funeral establishments are required to give consumers current retail price information, either over the phone or at the establishment upon request. So that means at the funeral home. Before discussing any funeral arrangements, they must give the consumers a general price list to keep. This list actually itemizes and it itemizes each of the costs of all the funeral services and the merchandise that will be for sale. If it's not included on the GPL, the funeral home must also provide a casket price list by law, an outer burial container price list, and an urn price list. So at the very end of this presentation, it's on slide 15. And so this will be recorded. So the slides, of course, will be in the recording too. But on slide 15, you'll find a plethora of different resources there that you can dive into about all of these body dispositions, as well as the laws around funerals in Texas specifically. Each state, of course, can have their own statutes and laws around funerals. And so it's very important to understand that we're just talking, and actually we're just talking right now, let's just say we're talking about Bear County. Because once we get out of Bear County, there may be some other statutes in other counties that we're not aware of. But let's talk a little bit about embalming. Of course, as most of us know, all of us here, because we deal with end of life, embalming is the use of chemicals internally and externally to disinfect and slow body decomposition. This actually started during the Civil War as a way to handle all of the people who had died during that time and during that war. Texas law does not require embalming, and by law, a funeral provider must get express permission, either in writing or verbally, to embalm the person who has passed. So that's very important to know. And it's very important that the person who will have the ongoing relationship with the funeral home, in this particular case for a traditional burial, that they start very early on talking with the folks, with the planning folks at the funeral home, and that they get all of those notifications up front. Traditional burials versus green burials tend to be much more formal. There's, the caskets are much more ornate. There are vaults that are involved that are cement vaults that the caskets go into. Also, traditional burials tend to have a much higher environmental impact. So the manufacturing, transportation, burial of all the traditional caskets and vaults can have a significant environmental impact, because many of those components are simply not decomposable. They're not biodegradable materials. And so they sit there in forever. And also potential for definitely a greater financial investment, although the green burial is kind of catching up to that in terms of the cost. So let's talk a little bit about green burials. So green burial has, as compared to the traditional burial, a much more minimal, okay, great, more minimal environmental impact. Embalming is not allowed in green burials because obviously it has chemicals that are leached into the soil. They require that for the burial, that only biodegradable materials be used. And so as you get with each of the green cemeteries, they will go over what those parameters are and what you can and cannot purchase to be buried in that particular green cemetery. But for the most part, about 2 years ago, Wayne and I did a lot of research on greens cemeteries in the Central Texas area. We don't have a whole lot, but there's about 4 or 5, one of those being hybrid and traditional together. But you can only use untreated wood for the casket. You can also, it gets I think it gets for the, whenever we talk about the caskets and shrouds, you can get very, very creative with the materials that you use, because some of the caskets also are made out of grasses and reeds and willow, wicker, seagrass, bamboo. It's just really amazing, the beautiful, beautiful caskets that can be made and that are biodegradable. Shrouds also must be of a biodegradable substance, so cotton, lemon wool, bamboo, silk. Also, a lot of and I know that our partners in crime, Countryside Memorial, they allow families to use in lieu of a shroud. They use They can also use either sheets or quilts. Urns also have to be in a biodegradable substance, no vaults, no concrete liners. Everything has to be naturally decomposable. The body will be buried at a depth of about 3 to 3.5 feet, which is definitely significantly uh, much higher in the soil composition, as well as, for the most part, they're required to have a mound, which helps with the microbes and oxygen. There are a lot of other things about green burials, but we're providing you some wonderful, great links around that. So we won't go through all of the, for example, the costs or anything like that.
And just real
Uh,
quick, I'll interject our final week. We're going to have some folks from the Green Burial on our panel. So if you have any questions, save those for our final week on the 20th of May, and you'll have an opportunity.
Because I'm sure that they'll also talk about the practice of shrouding and things like that too, which is cool. So just to touch on organ donation and whole body donation, there is an organization, donatelifetexas.org is a really perfect place for anyone who's new to organ donation or whole body donation. For the most part, that site focuses on organ, eyes, and tissues. Donation and whole body donation would be, for example, for scientific purposes, scientific research, or the body farm over at Texas State University, that sort of thing. And my husband actually is the recipient of eyes from or an organ donation. Did you want to talk a little bit about that, honey?
Um,
Or
it, I think that yes, and I had both. I recently had cornea transplants because of it. I have a, dispos a disposition called Fuchs dystrophy, and so eventually my corneas would burn out. So I needed to have them. I needed to have them replaced. And you would think that it was, if you look it up and you look at some Facebook groups, you'd find it seems like it's a really hard thing, but for me, it was like super easy. It was just another amazing way that that our bodies can be of service after we pass.
absolutely.
And yeah, and so I think it's a wonderful thing. I'm, eh, I mean, we people giving to other people. And so I feel thrilled that every day that I use my eyes every moment of every day, especially in the work I do. So writing and doing social media. So it's just it's a gift. It's a gift that keeps on giving. So I'm gonna hand it back to you, sweetie.
Okay. And Wayne and I actually we called the Donate Life organization. They forwarded us, they gave us the number for the eye bank. And so we actually spoke with the eye bank before Wayne went through his first surgery. And so they were able to give us a little bit of, just sort of make us feel at ease about that. Could you, next slide, Miss Bev? Okay. Death certificate. So the funeral home, as well as the green cemeteries, they are responsible for ordering the death certificates. There's also, you can see in the background there is, it's not really a form, but it does tell you everything that is required for the death certificate to fill it out. You will tell the funeral home or whoever is ordering those for you, or the person who's responsible for taking care of things after the person dies. You just tell them how many ever copies you need, and that will, of course, you'll pay for it, but it's $4 a piece per copy. So What I always encourage folks to do is order like 20 or 25. Order many, many more than you need, because the worst case scenario is that you end up having too many, then having to wait maybe several weeks to get an additional copy at the back end. Next slide, please. Notifications, obituaries, and eulogies. So obituaries are, let's think of those as obituaries are notifications of somebody's death. And I love this whenever I was doing research for this, is Buddy Crocker died at 88, rich but no longer moist. So it does a really cute, kind of a half little satire there and half obituary. Uh, but eulogies, normally eulogies are, so obituaries, let's go back to obituaries. Obituaries are a little bit more formal. So it's giving you more information about the person and their family, whereas a eulogy is more heartfelt. And maybe it might be a family member or it might be a friend. And eulogies may be delivered either at the memorial service right after the burial, or it could be at a celebration of life, really anywhere. But it's just sharing stories about the person who has passed. Next slide. And the memorial celebration of life, these things are really much, much more open to creativity, to creating a way that we honor a person's legacy, and honor their story. A memorial would normally be after somebody passes, whereas a celebration of life would normally be before they pass. And the person can also participate, the person who is on that end of life path can also participate in the celebration. So there really aren't any rules per se for any of these, but it's just to give you an idea of how you can honor that person who is passing. And then the next slide here. Unraveling pieces of a lifetime. So we could spend probably about 5 days going over this. But these are really kind of the high level. Think of them as task items after somebody passes, if you're the one or one of several family members who are responsible for making those calls, whether it be to the bank or to the retirement, um, uh, for stocks and securities, or for the retirement accounts or anything like that, to change the car title. This gives you kind of a very high level idea of the things that at a minimum need to be included. And we also share, Wayne and I also share, as a part of what we do, a very detailed workbook that includes all of these things too. So I'm sure that we can share that with anybody who's interested in, and there's no cost. It's just, we can just send it to you via email.
Do all these people require a death certificate?
Do all people require a death certificate?
All of these, the financial folks that you're working with, the insurance?
Most of them do. And most of them, you also, it's not the same documentation or paperwork. So it's not only the death certificate, but you also have to fill out, and more times than not, different financial institutions will require their specific paperwork created by their in-house counsel, which is so much fun to deal with. It's just, I just wish it was standardized to some extent, but it's just not. I don't know that like credit reporting agencies or anything like that, but definitely credit card companies and banks, and institutions like that. I think we're getting very close. Next slide. And so how can you prepare? Well, there's so many things that you can do. Hopefully this presentation gave you at least a high level view of some of the things that you can start thinking about, not only for yourself, but maybe a loved one you're responsible for. You can start first by doing your own living will, which in Texas, it's our advanced directive. It's called the Directive to Physicians and Family Surrogates because we're Texas and that's how we do things. It will help you. Doing a living will is, I think, the best tool that you can use to help you start thinking through those end of life choices, including body disposition, the type of memorial or celebration you or your loved one will prefer. To write, actually, we do this in our doula class, but to write your own obituary and your own eulogy are just really fabulous ways to kind of get you in that mindset and to help you start thinking about it. And then to start looking at that end of life checklist that we looked at, and maybe start filling out some of those things for yourself. Credit card numbers, account numbers, contacts at each of those individual institutions, and just start pulling together all of that information so that whenever you do pass, the person who will take up the baton after you, it won't be as difficult for them to do that. And so I think that brings us to the end, because the next slide is more of just a ton of resources. I actually wanted to be a librarian in in my other real life, but instead I do this sort of thing, which is put together some resources for folks that will hopefully help them.
And if anybody wants me to, I can send this to you.
Okay. Yeah.
I'd like to add one thing, if I may, that the directive to physicians and family is actually directed to physicians and family or surrogates. In that, imagine someone who doesn't have a family member who's making decisions. So just to note that that's how that's titled.
Yes, thank you.
Mhm.
Appreciate that.
Okay.
So,
Well, let's open this up to questions. Does anyone have any questions?
we were so thorough.
Okay, Siobhan? Unmute.
No question. I just adore Sandy and Wayne, and we just need to celebrate here Sandy getting her no cancer diagnosis. That's the best. So congratulations. Love you. Amazing.
Thank you so much. I appreciate
Yeah. That's yay. That's the best.
that.
Happy
It is,
2025. Right.
yeah. And it came very fast. The diagnosis came very quickly. We were expecting to wait for about a week, and it came almost immediately. So we were like, what kind of a gift is that? So, yeah.
I love that. It's cruel to make people wait. So I'm so happy you got it immediately. Anyway, that's just celebrate. Yay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I have a little side story to tell with our burial options. When my mother-in-law died, she had decided cremation, which was fine. And so as we sat with the funeral director, we were unsettled what to do with her remains, and nothing
Mhm.
clicked, nothing seemed right. What were we going to do with this urn? And the funeral director offered the suggestion of doing a biodegradable urn and then doing a burial in our backyard. And that clicked for us. And we knew that's what we wanted. We wanted our mother-in-law close by. We didn't want her
Mhm.
halfway across town. We wanted the kids to be around. So we had memorial service in our home, which was very lovely, a lovely tribute to her. And then at the end, we all went out back, and my husband had already prepared the ground. And so part of the
Mhm.
service was putting the biodegradable urn in the ground and covering it with a crepe myrtle tree. And it's in our backyard right now. And
Mm.
it just worked for us. And you don't hear it every day, but it's a beautiful option, you know?
You know, Sandy, I'm glad you said that. I am right now dealing with a family. I've had this patient for about 6 months now, and she's probably within 2, 3 days of dying. And you know, I just have these tender moments with her husband, but he just says, I don't know what to do with her cremains. I don't want them.
Mhm.
And he's,
Mm.
I don't have a
Well,
place to
it's
store
a
them. I don't
It's
have.
legit. It's a real thing. And you know, when you go to these funeral homes, they give you a catalog with like 200 types of urns to flip through. And you can
Mhm.
find the biodegradable ones. And then legally, you're allowed to put those in your yard. You can have a backyard service, and it's legal. So your family
I'm
might appreciate that.
gonna suggest that to him.
And we planted a tree over it and boxed it in with mulch and a watering source and all that. So it's very lovely. And so anyway, that's another option to file away.
That's wonderful. I love that.
I'd like to add something to this conversation that I think is really important. Of the people who are here tonight, who would speak for you if you could not? I would say most people here do have that, but I think that that's a very important consideration for people. And sometimes that person who speaks for you will not be a family member and probably should not be a family member. Um, I think that that's something that's a donut hole that you've seen in our practice, because sometimes the person who has the loudest voice is not the person who is designated, legally designated to make decisions. But they exert a lot of stress on other people who do make decisions.
Yeah.
So I think it's really so we've seen it in our practice. Um, you know, for us personally, we both have multiple people who will speak for us in the event that one of us passes first. So that's really important to have, and to have those kinds of conversations with those people. And I already have. So Sandy and I both have had those kinds of conversations. So I think it's important. I want to add that to the conversation.
Definitely. You know, in hospice, we do this, call it inpatient or GIP, general inpatient care, where
Mhm.
somebody has been told that there's no more they can do and their loved one is near death. So we don't bring them home. We care for them in the hospital, but
Yeah.
decisions have to be made quickly. They have to be made a DNR. Oftentimes they're extubated, so taken off life support, and hospice is there to support the family and the patient. But I've seen families in just division whether they're going to do this or not.
Yeah.
I just feel so badly for the person who's it lands on their shoulders because
Mhm.
these decisions weren't talked about, or yeah, it's very, very tough.
In our first case of Beverly, the first professional client we took, uh, the person who hired us was not the person who could make decisions, or she had to be countermanded because of the lack of money. That she wanted something that required money that people that the it was three sisters, the other two sisters didn't have. And so Sandy and I both learned that you can from the sisters, that if two of the three sisters agreed, they could do what they needed to do, which was cremation. You know, the sister who objected, who had the loudest voice, wanted a green burial, but the other two didn't have the money to pay for it. So that's a real problem. It's a real concern and real sticky. And we, as doulas, we just had to be Switzerland, but also be to the point of understanding that what's doable, what's practical, what's realistic. You know,
Mhm.
what can you really do? And to have that really tough conversation with them to tell them, hey, this is what you're saying, but can this happen? Is this realistic for everyone concerned, or is doable? You know, so.
Somebody mentioned, let's see, sometimes they say that cremain's saltiness will kill a plant. Then she said, I suppose that isn't true. So I don't know. I have not heard that. How about anybody else?
Mhm. But it might be true. I don't know.
Oh, yeah. And then
But who was it? Did Courtney say something about they have a willow tree where?
Yeah, so where I grew up on my family farm, there's about 4 or 5 different family members now that a big part of their ashes were dumped like right around this planting that we did of a willow tree, and it's like thriving. So it's grown really fast and strong. But that's not to say that it's not true or not, but that's an example.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know.
Courtney,
But
I have a
you
question.
bury a body in the backyard, right?
Courtney, I have a question for you because you're the resident artist in the group. Have you had people, would you tackle a project in which people would use their cremains, for example, to
Oh,
do a piece of artwork?
I would, but there's a documentary about an artist in Texas, Wayne Gilbert, that did exactly that with most of his career, or a big part of his career, and it's really amazing. Yeah, and I love his art too. It's pretty cool.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I've heard of it.
Can you post that in the chat, Courtney?
Yeah, let me figure out the name of it, but I'll put his name at least.
Thank
Yeah, and I have folks that have used artful ashes, and it is crystal art pieces, and their person's ashes are swirled in to this artwork, and they're gorgeous. And when my dog died, I had a beagle that died a few years ago. I went to them, and they made a globe, a glass globe with a paw print in it, and his ashes are in the paw print.
Oh,
Wow.
my goodness.
Nice.
Wow.
Now, I don't know what's going to happen to it when I'm gone. Nobody will know what it is. So it'll probably end up, and that's the thing, people get these urns and put them on the mantle, and then they die, and then their kids come along. But anyway, so generation after generation, they're like, who is this? And who's ash? What do we do with these? And yeah, I mean, that's a reality now. I have gone to a ceremony at Fort Sam with one of my patients who was at ABODE and graduated. And so he's home on hospice, thriving, but they belong to this group that about every 2 years, they bring remains back here to Fort Sam Houston of unclaimed bodies and ashes of veterans. And we do a burial there. And so these folks are all laid to rest with honors. And then a volunteer or somebody who's involved in the program gets to be the one to receive their flag, because they all get a flag and the 21 gun salute. It's very beautiful.
Wow. There's so many stories and, so many things that we can do to just honor those folks who are passing. And I think that's a very beautiful, especially those who may be forgotten. So.
Okay. Well, it's 7:29. Do we have any more questions? We can take one or two more.
Hi, I was curious about options for spreading cremains. Like what options have you experienced in your work with clients?
Well, we
Mm.
haven't, I think the only, we have had two, but it's not spreading. One opted not to spread, but it was to put it into a columbarium, I think it's called,
Yeah.
at the church. And then we have a current client as well who's she may be about 3 or 4 days. And her option is to, but we haven't had anything specific of folks to spread them in other locations. And I don't know, to be honest with you, from like a maritime perspective or Texas perspective, land, what those specific laws are.
Yeah, I don't think anybody asks permission. I think they just go do
Yeah,
it.
you just do it, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I had a friend whose dad, he was always difficult to them. You know, they just had this love-hate relationship. Well, his dad wrote in his will that he wanted to be buried at sea, and he gave them the coordinates, and it was the deepest part of the Gulf. I mean, it was like a 3-hour ride out in the Gulf, and he told him what day he wanted it done, and it was a day that the sea was just choppy, and so they're all throwing up, but they get to that spot and they dumped his ashes, and his sister said at one point they were so ready to just say, let's just do it here, but no, they went all the way out there, just dumped his
wanted,
ashes in the sea.
I wanted to tell y'all that if you go to the art show at Reconciliation, May 3rd and 4th, in the courtyard there are, that's a place, it's sacred ground, so that's a place where ashes are scattered. And the names of the people that are there are etched in large stones around the
Mhm.
courtyard.
Yeah.
So take a look and see that, because it's really beautiful.
Oh, that's beautiful. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, Patsy. So I will bring this meeting to a close, and just remind you that next week, on the 29th, Natalie, wave your hand, Natalie, and I are going to do Before You Go. And we're going to talk about getting in touch with our mortality, fears surrounding death. And then I just want to plug our art show. If you aren't a member of ABODE or come around ABODE, we do have a wonderful art show every year. This year is on May 3rd and 4th at the Church of Reconciliation, and a percentage of sales goes to support ABODE, and it's a lovely event. It's over Saturday evening, the 3rd, and then we do it again on Sunday morning, the 4th, and it's a lovely event, great place to just socialize, look at some art, and take some art home. So if no one has anything else, I will say good night to you. And I thank you all for coming and just being on this Zoom with us. And we'll see you next Tuesday, same bat time, same bat channel. And we will talk about the fears around death and mortality. So bring your questions. All right. So good night, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.